I'm going to come at this from a matter of public policy and ask the question, why is the government in the marriage business in the first place? Why does government recognize marriage? Why does marriage matter for the political community? How ought we to define marriage? And why does it matter? That's how I'm going to come at this question. And I just want to structure my remarks tonight in the 10 minutes I have around three basic things. What is marriage? Why does marriage matter? And what will the consequences be of redefining marriage? And the simplest way to get at this is to say, from the government's perspective, it doesn't care about your love life. Government is not in the marriage business because it cares about adult romance. Government is in the marriage business because the union of a man and a woman can produce a child, and children need a mom and a dad. That's the only reason we have government in the bedroom. So from the state's perspective, marriage really exists to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife, to then be equipped to be mother and father to any children that that union might produce. It's based on the anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary. It's based on the biological fact that reproduction requires a man and a woman. It's based on the social reality that children deserve both a mother and a father. Now, whenever a child is born, a mother will be close by. That's a fact of biology. She's frequently in the same room. Good, that's a sign that you're with me. All right, so then the question is, will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? That's a question for culture, and so that's a question for law. Marriage is an institution that diverse societies throughout history and across the globe have devised as a way of maximizing the likelihood that that man commits to that woman, and then the two of them take responsibility for raising that child. And now part of this is based on the reality that there's no such thing as parenting. And Rod already hit on this a little bit earlier. There's no such thing as parenting in the abstract. There's mothering and there's fathering. And I actually have a quote here that we cite in the book. I should mention that my co-authors were a classmate of mine at Princeton, Sherif Girgis, and then a professor of ours at Princeton, Robert George. And in the book, we make a philosophical argument for what marriage is, and then we look at some of the social science. And when we get to the social science on parenting, we quote a sociologist at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And he did a literature review of all of the social science on parenting to see what we know about parenting. And here's what he concluded. He said, the burden of social science evidence supports the idea that gender-differentiated parenting is important for human development, and that the contribution of fathers to child rearing is unique and irreplaceable. So then at the conclusion he said, quote, we should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being, end quote. So that was his review of the social science. But you don't have to be a social scientist to see this. Do a thought experiment with me. It's Saturday morning, and a 5-year-old boy is in the living room wrestling with one of his parents. And the parent is teaching the 5-year-old how to be masculine without being violent, how to put people in headlocks, but not to bite or pull hair or gouge eyes. Which parent is most likely in the living room? And the laughter gives away the answer. It's the father. And this isn't because we've engaged in gender stereotypes in which only fathers can wrestle on living room carpets, but this is the type of behavior that comes natural to fathers. It's the type of behavior that fathers enjoy engaging in with their sons. It's for the same reason that fathers are typically the one that's throwing the baby up in the air, while the mother's the one that says, honey, not so high. That's the type of behavior that comes naturally to mothers, not because we've engaged in some form of gender stereotyping in which mothers have to say not so high, but mothers tend to be the more nurturing, the more protective, the more supportive parent. Now, what happens on that Saturday morning in the living room on the carpet actually matters, because we see that children who grow up without fathers are more likely to commit crime and more likely to end up in jail. One of the things that takes place with the 5-year-old on the carpet, with the 10-year-old out back playing ball with his father, with the 14-year-old navigating high school with his father's guidance, is how to channel distinctively masculine aggression into a constructive rather than a destructive channel. Right? When this doesn't happen, this is when you get the problem with teenage crime. And the fathers tend to be the one that help their boys develop into mature men. Fathers do something different but complementary for their daughters. Fathers are the ones that typically scare away the bad boyfriends. Partly this is because the father tends to be a little bit taller than the mother. His voice tends to be a little bit deeper than the mother's. The father tends to be a little bit larger than the mother, so he's better at scaring away boyfriends, but also because the father was once a young man himself, and he knows what the wrong type of boy might be looking for in his daughter, and so he's more sensitive to that. The father who's married to his daughter's mother is also modeling for her what a good relationship looks like and what she should be looking for in a boyfriend and in a future husband. And that matters. So we see that when we look at the social science, girls who grow up without their fathers are more likely to have an out-of-wedlock pregnancy, because that father is the one who's more likely to be policing that relationship. Now, you could say those are good thought experiments, good anecdotes, but tell me about the actual data. So let me read you a quote, and then I'll ask you to guess who this quote is from. We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves. And the foundations of our community are weaker because of it. Who's the author of that quote? President Obama, before he evolved on the marriage issue. President Obama grew up without a father. And so one of the reasons why he's spoken so movingly about this is that he knows firsthand that it's a much steeper hill to climb when you're growing up without your father involved in your life. That's one of the reasons why he's been such a vocal advocate for fatherhood and why he's been so devoted to his 2 daughters. He wants to make sure they have a good relationship with their father. And none of this is in any way to say that children who grow up outside of marriage are somehow destined to failure. President Obama seems to be doing pretty well for himself. So he shows that you can turn out just fine. But he would be the first to admit that it was a tougher hill to climb and that no child would want to be in a relationship, lacking a relationship with a mother or a father. That what the child most desires is a relationship with the 2 people who brought them into existence, both the mother and the father. And that those who don't have this great gift, through no fault of their own, have a tougher road to hoe. And this is also not to say anything critical about single mothers. If anything, they are frequently the most heroic people in our society, who when the boyfriend or the husband abandoned them, abandoned the children, they were the ones that were there to help raise that child. And they'll frequently also be one of the first people to say how they wished that that guy would have manned up and committed to them and committed to those children. Let me say one more word about why marriage matters. What we've seen over the past 40 years with the breakdown of the American family is that for those children born and raised outside of the married mother-father family, this is when you're more likely to see child poverty. This is when you're likely to see an increase in crime, a decrease in social mobility. This is when government welfare spending took off. So everything that you could care about, if you care about social justice and you care about limited government, if you care about the poor and you care about freedom, is better served by a healthy marriage culture than it is by a big government solution that tries to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage culture. Big government solution in the form of a welfare state or a police state or a prison state. Marriage, rightly understood, is something that limits the state. It's a civil society institution that limits what government will be doing by limiting government's necessity to be meddling in the lives of citizens and their families. But what we've seen over the past 40 years is that at one point, single motherhood was an unheard of phenomenon. Virtually every child was born inside of marriage and raised by their married mother and father. Today, the statistics are that 40% of all Americans are born outside of marriage, 50% of Hispanics, and 73% of African Americans. Through no fault of these children, but they will have a much tougher challenge in life, achieving social mobility, achieving prosperity, achieving a flourishing life. So in the remaining time I have, I just want to mention 3 ways in which redefining marriage will have negative consequences. Because you could agree with me and say, yep, marriage is about uniting a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, a mother and a father. You could agree with me that marriage matters because it's the best protector against child poverty. It's the best guarantee of social mobility. It's the best limiting institution on the Leviathan of the state. But how will allowing Adam and Steve to get married impact any of this? How does redefining marriage in any way hurt you or your marriage? Let me just mention 3 ways in which it will do this. Under the general rubric of ideas have consequences and bad ideas have bad consequences. The first consequence here is that if you redefine marriage to make it a genderless institution, there will be no institution left in civil society that upholds, even as an ideal, that every child deserves both a mother and a father. What the message would be here is it will redefine marriage to make it more about adult romance, more about the desires of the consenting adults than about the needs of children. It'll send the message that men and women are functionally interchangeable and therefore mothers and fathers are interchangeable, and that 2 moms or 2 dads is the same thing as a married mom and dad. And if you doubt that the law teaches, think back to when we redefined marriage the first time, in the 70s and the 80s with no-fault divorce. Previously, divorce rates in America were in the near single digits. And then they peaked at roughly 50%. They've dropped back down into the 40s. And some scholars are now questioning whether they're actually in 40% or if they're actually closer to 50% because of delayed marriage. And so if you delay the onset of marriage, you'll delay the divorce. And so just give it time and the divorce rate will catch back up with the delayed marriage rate. But more or less, the reason that we saw the divorce rate skyrocket like this is that at one point, American law said that you had to file, when you filed for divorce, you had to cite fault. And the 3 A's in the common law were abuse, abandonment, and adultery. You would cite a reason for ending your marriage. My spouse abuses me, my spouse has abandoned me, my spouse has committed adultery. Serious reasons for ending a relationship that otherwise was expected to be permanent, that was to last till death do us part. With no-fault divorce, a spouse could now abandon his or her partner for any reason or for no reason at all. And the law taught that marriage need not even aspire to be permanent. And the law shapes culture. Our culture then shapes our beliefs, and our beliefs then shape our actions. In the same way, if right now the biggest social problem we face in America is absentee fathers, how will we insist that fathers are essential when the law has redefined marriage to make fathers optional? That's the question for President Obama after he evolved on marriage. And so that's the first consequence, is that it will redefine the purpose of marriage, the understanding of marriage. It will center marriage not on ensuring the best stable environment for children, but about consenting adult romance. It makes men and women, mothers and fathers, interchangeable. The second consequence is that there's no reason to think that the redefinition of marriage would stop here. And we've already seen advocates on the left coin 3 new words to describe how they would like to see marriage further redefined. And so I'll just briefly mention these 3 words, and I would imagine most of you are not familiar with these 3 words. We weren't familiar with them until we started doing research for our book. The first is the term throuple. A throuple is a 3-person couple. And the term throuple was introduced to us in New York Magazine. New York Magazine is a fairly standard left-leaning publication for New Yorkers. And the idea here was that this is a polyamorous relationship. It's a group marriage. Unlike a polygamous relationship in which one man's married to a woman, the same man married to a different woman, the same man married to a third woman, a polyamorous relationship, the entire ensemble is married to each other. So the throuple, they're all married to one another. The quartet, they're all married to one another. If you go before a court of law and you demand marriage equality for the same-sex couple, and you say that the union of a man and a woman is irrational and arbitrary, what principle is left for you to deny marriage equality to the same-sex throuple or the opposite-sex quartet? Because remember, the slogan that the left has used here is marriage equality. They never answer the question of what is marriage. They never tell us what marriage is, but they tell us they want equality. And then they have another slogan, love equals love. And so if you redefine marriage as say love equals love, it's about adult romance, about adult caregiving, about adult intimacy, why is that something that only two people can form? Why not marriage equality for the throuple? Because the way that we got to twosomes in American law is that it's one man and one woman who can unite in an act that produces new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. And marriage is about uniting those people in a stable relationship. And once you say that the union of a man and a woman, a mother and a father is irrational and arbitrary, what's the principled basis for monogamy? What's magical about the number two once you've denied there's something about one man and one woman? So that's the throuple. The next term is the term monogamish. Monogamish was introduced to us in the New York Times, in the Sunday magazine, one of the most prominent publications, standard bearer for liberal thought. And this was a piece, a profile of the gay activist Dan Savage. And Dan Savage, in the part of his profile where he was saying, here's something that straight couples can learn from gay couples, he said they could learn the virtue of the monogamish relationship. This is a relationship of two people, but it doesn't have to be sexually exclusive. He was saying that what straight couples can learn from gay couples is that you don't have to seek all of your sexual fulfillment inside of marriage. That in fact, your emotional union with your spouse might be enhanced if you were free to seek out sexual gratification outside of the marital institution. And so he called this a monogamish relationship. The last term is the term wed lease. This was introduced to us in the pages of the Washington Post 1 month after the Supreme Court ruled on the Defense of Marriage Act case. And the idea here is that just like you can lease a car or you can lease a house, you should be able to lease a spouse. And the author was a lawyer. He was arguing that the problem with marriage in America is that we have an unrealistic expectation that we can pledge to love another person till death do us part. 50% of marriages are ending in divorce because we have this unrealistic expectation and then we can't live up to it. Better if we just didn't have the expectation in the first place. So we should have temporary marriage license, a 5 or 10-year wed lease instead of wedlock. Wedlock denotes something strong, sturdy, and permanent. Wed lease, the exact opposite. Now, whatever you think about the morality or the theology of thruples and monogamish relationships and wed leases, think about the public policy consequences. The point of the government being in marriage is to encourage a man and a woman to commit permanently and exclusively so that any children that they create are conceived inside of a stable relationship with a mother and a father. But the throuple, the monogamish relationship, and the wed lease increase the odds that men have multiple sexual partners in short-lived relationships, therefore creating children with multiple women to whom their love, their care, their attention, their devotion, and their money are subsequently divided. This is a recipe for creating fragmented families and fatherless children. And yet, all three of these new words, all three of these forms of redefining marriage follow as logical conclusions of eliminating the male-female procreative aspect of marriage. Once you deny a marriage has anything to do with a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, a mother and a father, why should it be a permanent, exclusive, monogamous relationship? Because those three norms are downhill from the male-female part. One last thing I'll mention is the third consequence for religious liberty. We've already seen in Massachusetts, in Illinois, and in the District of Columbia that the government has forced Catholic charities and evangelical foster care and adoption agencies out of the adoption and foster care space because they wanted to find homes for the children in their care with married moms and dads. And the government said that's discrimination. You have to treat the same-sex couple on an equal basis as you do the married mom and dad. These agencies said, we have social science that show that children deserve a mom and a dad, do best with a mom and a dad. We want to find married moms and dads for the children that are entrusted to our care. We're not trying to prevent gay or lesbian couples from adopting from other agencies, from the government agencies, from secular agencies. Just we want to run our agencies in accordance with our beliefs. And the government said, no, we won't give you the adoption agency license. And it's illegal to run an adoption agency without a license. This does absolutely nothing to help children. It does nothing to help children find homes. Shutting down adoption agencies and foster care programs just scores a point for political correctness. It scores a point in the wars about adult sexuality, but it does nothing to help children. We've then seen photographers and florists and bakers and innkeepers, more or less any professional that intersects with the wedding industry, has now been sued by a same-sex couple who asked them to perform services to help celebrate their same-sex wedding. And we've had cases with the photographer, the florist, the baker, the innkeeper declining to do so. They didn't refuse to serve gays or lesbians. That's how it's reported in the media. They have no problem baking birthday cakes for gay and lesbian customers, no problem taking taking portraits, no problem making bouquets of flowers for Get Well Soon. What they had a concern about was using their God-given talents to celebrate a same-sex wedding. They didn't want to use those God-given gifts to tell a lie about what they believed to be the truth about a God-instituted society like marriage. Evangelical and Catholic photographers and florists don't have a monopoly on those industries. There are plenty of other photographers and florists and bakers more than willing to provide their services to the same-sex wedding and to make that money. So there's no example that we can point to of a same-sex couple going without wedding flowers or a wedding cake or a wedding photographer. And yet they sued nonetheless. And frequently, the evangelicals, the Catholics, have lost these lawsuits. The most famous example is the case of Elaine Photography. It's a case out of New Mexico in 2006. Elaine Huguenin, an evangelical Christian, politely declined to take the wedding photos of a same-sex wedding ceremony. In 2008, the New Mexico Commission on Human Rights ruled that she had violated the human rights of that couple. This past summer, the New Mexico Supreme Court, hearing an appeal of that case, concluded in agreement with the New Mexico Commission on Human Rights that Elaine had violated their human rights. And in a concurring opinion, one of the judges said that the price of citizenship was that Elaine had to take these pictures. He didn't say that the same-sex couple should have just gone to a different photographer, live and let live. No, he said she had to violate her beliefs and to serve them. So that's the third consequence, is the consequence of whether or not private citizens, the associations they form, the communities they form, the businesses they form, will be left free to operate according to their beliefs, or will government coerce everyone to treat and to recognize a same-sex relationship as if it's a marriage, even when doing so would violate your conscience? So those are the three consequences. With that, I'll stop, and I think we'll have time for some questions.
Hi there.
We're all set to go. Do you have? Go ahead. Can
Okay.
you hear me? Hello, hello.
I can hear you.
I think I have to swallow this thing to be heard.
Yeah, you do. You have to eat the mic.
I'll put
Okay.
it outside. Please go ahead with your question.
Okay, so the question I haven't done tons of research about, this issue, but a lot of times the, gays and lesbians say, well, I need to be married so that I can get hospital rights and all those things. And I believe, that they should be able to go to a hospital, get care and things, but I really have a problem with how it affects children, But anyway, how can we let them have some of the rights, insurance, or get hospital things? That's the question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is one of the most frequent red herrings in this debate, largely because no one is denying hospital visitation to gays or lesbians. There's been no reported instance that I know of, and I follow this stuff fairly closely, of a hospital refusing to treat someone because they're gay or lesbian. And anyone can file with power of attorney to have anyone as their next of kin or to have authority over their medical records, visitation. I'm not married. If I was to become incapacitated, someone has to be able to visit me at the hospital to make decisions on my behalf. And there are forms that I can fill out to designate whoever I want to be able to do that. Under one of the reforms that was enacted, if I remember correctly, under Obamacare, was to make it explicit that in all 50 states there needs to be an easy way for people outside of marriage, including therefore same-sex couples, to be able to fill out a form like this. So I think in general, and you can think back to the Supreme Court case, there was a lesbian couple suing because when one of the partners passed away, they were married in Canada, they then moved to New York State, which didn't have same-sex marriage at the time, but New York State was recognizing their Canadian same-sex marriage. And then when one of the partners died, the other one was hit with the inheritance tax. So they were millionaires, and they were suing to avoid having to pay their inheritance tax. This is something that the media never reported on, because one of the odd things about the push for same-sex marriage is it's largely an elite luxury good bought for on the backs of the poor. Because what it does is it allows consenting adults to have the love lives they want to have, but it doesn't do anything to help ensure that children will have a mom and a dad. All we needed to do, and it's something that actually the Heritage Foundation has been advocating for the past 20 years, is repeal the death tax. It's a silly tax in the first place because you pay taxes on that money when you earned the money. So why should you pay taxes on it again when you die and you leave it to one of your loved ones? But you don't have to redefine marriage to fix that problem. The solution here was that she shouldn't have had to pay the inheritance tax because it's a silly tax. And in the same way, you don't have to redefine marriage to allow people to have hospital visitations and things like that. You can have it so that anyone who's not married can fill out a form and have whoever they want be their power of attorney or be the one that visits them in the hospital. I think what we want to keep clear is why do we have marriage in the first place? It's not for inheritance purposes or for hospital purposes. It's to form the type of stable environment that best protects children. And it's to gear and to guide the sexuality between a man and a woman that can create a child into a stable relationship that's best for that child.
We have some other questions before we do, Ryan. Talk into that mic? All right, I'll talk into the mic, see if that helps. Does that help? There we go. Okay, that's. I'm thinking about going home tonight and asking my wife if she's interested in a throuple, a monogamish, or a wed lease. That could be a new exciting career for us. We have another question from the audience. Go ahead, please.
I just had a question about in the states that have accepted gay marriage as socially acceptable, has there been divorce, especially in the relationships that do have children, and do the states enforce the types of laws and things that they enforce when a normal traditional marriage gets divorced to protect the children in the case of those children?
Yeah, so my understanding is that same-sex divorce is a new and up-and-coming industry for lawyers. Particularly, actually, one of the, that's somewhat a joke, but it's true. So yes, the states that have a redefined marriage also now are seeing that some of the same-sex couples that got same-sex married are now also filing for same-sex divorce. And where this is becoming a legal issue is when they move to a state that doesn't recognize same-sex marriage. So if you were to be married in Massachusetts and then move to Texas, what happens when you try to file for a divorce since Texas doesn't recognize you as married in the first place? This actually highlights one of the reasons why the Defense of Marriage Act was actually really necessary. We needed a uniform federal definition of marriage because you couldn't have this piecemeal thing. And so it was interesting that when the Supreme Court struck it down, there's no rational basis for this apart from animus. the basis that the Congress had cited when they passed the Defense of Marriage Act was that we need to have a single definition of marriage for federal purposes all across the United States. Whether or not divorce rates have remained constant or risen or lowered, it's really too soon to tell. Massachusetts was the first state to redefine marriage when the court imposed it on them, and that was only 10 years ago. And the type of social change that would take place here would be one that would take place over generations. It would be with the way that the law would be shaping the culture and the cultural imagination of children today, and how they would then live out marriage when they're adults, based upon what they're learning in the school systems, textbooks, TV, culture, all of that.
Thank you. We have another question over here. Yes, go ahead, please.
It's on, I guess. I have a question about the end game. When you said the phrase "live and let live," I think all of us know that they don't want to live and let live. The second step down would be "live and let die," as the Beatles say. But I'm wondering if they really want total chaos and have it die and let die. Will you comment?
Sure. I think the end game here is really to use the law to eliminate any support for marriage as the union of a man and a woman, as the exclusive union of a man and a woman. So the end game here isn't just the freedom to live and to love how a same-sex couple wants to, but it's the freedom to coerce other people to recognize that relationship as a marriage and to eliminate any dissenting viewpoints. That's, to me, the mindset that's animating those who want to coerce the photographer and the florist and the innkeeper and the baker and to shut down the adoption agencies that Catholics and evangelicals run. It's not clear to me how a movement just of live and let live would be using the government and using the law to coerce other people into celebrating their relationship, if that's what the end game was. Let me add one other thing from the note card. It was a question of what was I had mentioned the book during my formal remarks, and then I didn't actually say what it's titled or who the co-authors are. So let me quickly answer that. The book is titled "What is Marriage? Man and Woman, a Defense." The co-authors are Sherif Girgis, Ryan Anderson, and Robert George. It's been out now for a little over a year. Justice Samuel Alito quoted it twice in his dissenting opinion on the Defense of Marriage Act case.
Brian, let me ask you a question. Do we have another question from the audience here? Need a microphone? Okay, right there. Go ahead. Okay.
In these famous lawsuits that have occurred recently, in these,
Just hold it close down.
is it on? All right. In these recent lawsuits that are famous nationally, why isn't, in those situations, why isn't a countersuit filed immediately claiming the same discrimination against them, so that the courts would have to make a determination as to whose rights really trump?
I think partly it's because of the nature of the law is that the law says that they're non-discrimination statutes that say you can't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. And they then have been interpreted to mean that if you think marriage is the union of a man and a woman, you're discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation. I think the facts of these cases clearly show that that's not true, because the baker, the florist, the photographer have no problem serving gays or lesbians. They have no problem baking birthday cakes and that sort of thing. Their only concern is with violating their beliefs about marriage. Whether it's with the wedding reception, whether it's the wedding ceremony, something like that. And it's not clear what the counter lawsuit would claim, except for those states that have explicit religious liberty protections. Then they can claim that you're violating my religious liberty. And the way that frequently these religious liberty protections work is that in order for the state to substantially burden someone's exercise of religion, it has to be for a compelling state interest that's being pursued in the least restrictive means possible. Now, how is requiring every wedding photographer to take same-sex wedding photos a compelling state interest being pursued in the least restrictive means possible? If there are other photographers more than willing to take the same-sex wedding photos, do we need to coerce every photographer to do so? And so that would be countersuit. The Elaine photography case has been appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we are expecting really any week now the court to announce whether or not it will review the case. And if it reviews the case, then their attorneys would have the opportunity to make that counter argument, that really you're violating our, in this case they're actually arguing it's compelled speech. They're appealing it under free speech jurisprudence to say the government can't force you to speak something against what your beliefs are, and photography is a form of speech. A wedding photographer is telling the story of this wedding ceremony, and it happens to be a story Elaine doesn't believe in. And so that's going to be her counter argument at the Supreme Court, if they review the case.
All right, let's swing over to the other side of the room here. We have a question. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I work for a law firm here in Utah, and we are beginning to have this issue where a couple gets divorced in Utah. The spouse that has custody moves away and begins a homosexual relationship in another state. And the issue has come up with minor children being adopted by that new relationship. Have you run into this? What protection do you foresee?
I actually know nothing about that scenario, so I am useless to you. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. It's disconcerting.
All right, we have other questions here. Where are we? Do we have other questions coming? Well, let me ask you this one, Ryan, while we're getting the mic. This question comes in. Is there any social science data regarding the impact of children raised by same-sex parents? That's an issue that comes up a lot.
Sure. So let me answer this by saying something about the consensus of social science and then more recent social science. For about 40 years, we've now had social science that studied family formation and family types that showed that children who were raised by a married biological mother and father did best on a host of outcomes when compared to single parenting, divorce and remarriage, and cohabitation. So they studied all of the alternative family forms, and they found that none of them prepared children as well as a married mother and father. And we've had about 40 years of large, random samples, representative samples, that repeatedly came to this conclusion. Then within the past decade or so, we've had a significant number of small, convenient samples, samples that are neither random nor representative, that actually came to the conclusion that lesbian parents are the best, that the children of lesbians actually outperformed children of married mothers and fathers. And this raised some questions from some social scientists who thought that's really odd, that children who grew up without a father in the single-parent home, in the divorced home, in the cohabiting home, had all these negative outcomes, but children who grew up without a father but with two mothers seemed to actually outperform. So they looked in, one, to what was the nature of these studies, and they found that the average respondent was a double-income, upper-middle-class lesbian family living in Manhattan or San Francisco. And so it wasn't a representative sample. And so from a non-representative sample, you can draw no conclusions whatsoever about the population as a whole. Then there have been 2 studies conducted within the past 2 years that used a large random representative sample. One used the Canadian census data, and one was the study that Mark Regnerus conducted. And Regnerus' study, it used the large random representative sample, and it found that when it looked at the cohabiting relationship, the single parenting relationship, the divorce and remarriage, that all of his results followed exactly from the previous 40 years consensus. So he thought that was a good indication that the sample that he had conducted and analyzed was tracking well. And then he added another category of children whose parents had been in a same-sex relationship. And now this was not in keeping with those convenient samples, the small samples that showed that lesbians were best. This was in keeping with the idea that children who were growing up without a married mom and a dad were having certain challenges in life. That study was then attacked viciously in the media and in the academy. They claimed that it wasn't actually a study of same-sex marriage. It was just a study of parents who were in same-sex relationships, which is what it was. I mean, he was very honest about what he was able to draw on his sample, that there just aren't that many, there aren't that many instances of same-sex parenting. And so especially to get an 18-year same-sex marriage to compare apples to apples, but he was saying that's one of the ways in which the poorer outcomes actually are produced, because same-sex relationships aren't as stable. So what we know from the social science in general is that biology matters, gender matters, and stability matters. We know that having a biological connection with both parents to the child makes a difference. We know that having gender complementary parenting matters, so having a mother and a father matters. And we know that stability, having as few transitions as possible. That's why cohabitation and divorce tend to be bad for children. They're not very stable. So now what do we know about the same-sex parenting environment? There won't be a biological connection between both parents and the child. At most, you'll have a biological connection with one. There won't be gender complementary parenting, because you won't have both a mother and a father. You'll have two of males or two females. And in general, so far, it doesn't look like the relationship will be very stable. And in actuality, lesbians have the least stable relationships of all three types. Male-male, female-female, and male-female. It's the female-female that lasts the shortest amount of time. The reason why is that 2/3 to 3/4 of all divorces are filed for by women, because women have a very high satisfaction requirement for emotional intimacy. And so it has nothing to do with homosexuality, it just has to do with the gender distribution of the relationship. A double female relationship has two people with very high satisfaction requirements. And so it tends to be the shortest lived of all relationships. The double male relationship, on the other hand, tends to be the one that's the most promiscuous. And that's not because it's homosexual, it's because it has two men involved. That has something to do more with maleness than with anything of sexuality. So anyway, so this is what the preliminary social science is showing. I think in general, the social science on same-sex parenting is in its infancy. We have no studies whatsoever about same-sex male parenting. When we do hear about the same studies on same-sex parenting, it's almost always same-sex female couples, lesbian couples in parenting. So we don't actually know what it's like to grow up with two fathers. There haven't been scientific studies conducted that do this.
Do you know how many lines there are off that lesbian study line? I don't want to even go there. That could be dangerous. We have another question. Yes, go ahead, please.
This might be a question you'd want to tackle at the end, but where do you think this is going? What's going to happen here, and what is required to prevent it, slow it down?
Yeah, great question. Justice Scalia, in his dissenting opinion in the Defense of Marriage Act case, said, let's not fool ourselves. This court is going to do whatever this court wants to do. And he said, we're just waiting for the second shoe to drop. And Justice Scalia has this annoying habit of being the most colorful writer on the Supreme Court, the most insightful opinion writer, but also he frequently predicts the future. He has this gift of prophecy in that respect. I don't know if he'll be right about this matter, but it seems possible that the Supreme Court will redefine marriage in all 50 states. If it was to do that, it would be acting inappropriately. So the first thing to say is that Utah's marriage amendment is good law. The Utah marriage amendment was passed by 75% of the citizens of Utah. It serves a good public policy purpose of maximizing the likelihood that children will have a mom and a dad, and it restricts no one's freedoms. So the Utah marriage amendment defines what marriage is, but it leaves consenting adults free to live and to love how they want to. And there's nothing about the Utah marriage amendment that says that a federal court judge should declare it unconstitutional. So that's the first thing to say there. If the court was to do that, though, I think the appropriate response is to remain vigilant in defending your law in the same way that the pro-life movement has. The pro-life movement has never accepted Roe v. Wade as the truth about the Constitution when it comes to unborn human life. No pro-lifer thinks that there's actually a constitutional right to kill an unborn child. And the Supreme Court said it in Roe, it repeated it again in the Casey decision. It can repeat it no number of times. that will actually make it true that there actually is a constitutional right to abortion. The court can say it's there, but you can read the Constitution, study it as much as you want. There is no constitutional right to kill an unborn child. And so what has the pro-life movement done for the past 41 years? It's borne witness to that fact. It's borne witness to the humanity of the unborn child. It's borne witness to the truth that it deserves to have a right to life that's protected in law. And through pro-life scholarship, the scientists doing the embryology, the philosophers, the theologians, the lawyers, the activist groups, the people who run the crisis pregnancy centers, they more or less have perpetuated a pro-life movement even when the Supreme Court has repeatedly tried to more or less eliminate it. And what you saw 41 years ago was that public opinion was shifting in favor of abortion rights. I mean, there was a pro-life movement prior to Roe v. Wade. That's where we got all the pro-life laws that were passed that the court struck down. But at one point, public opinion was 2/3 to 1/3. Only 33% of Americans were pro-life. At one point, all of the young people the media claimed were in favor of abortion. At one point, pro-lifers like Ted Kennedy and Jesse Jackson and Bill Clinton and Al Gore evolved to become pro-choicers, just like we had people like President Obama evolve on the marriage issue. But now, 41 years later, after these pro-life scholars and activists did their work, my generation's more pro-life than my parents' generation. And a majority of Americans now identify as pro-life. So I think the end game in that sense, from our perspective, is that whatever the court does, we continue to witness to the truth about marriage. And we continue to insist that law and public policy reflect the truth about marriage.
One more question from the audience, then we'll try and get to some of these questions that we have here. Have we got another question here?
Vacate the premise and be elsewhere. So I feel really bad, but there's 2 or 3 people who did you get your questions in? I'm not going to be able to do it. What we're going to have to do is, Rod's got some cards. He's going to fire through those questions as, rapid fire, try to give Ryan a chance to answer as much as possible. Once again, I do apologize that we weren't able to address everybody. This is a building and they're going to kick us out. So I'm going to hand it over to Rod.
Okay, I feel like James Lipton in Inside the Actors Studio with all these cards. Here we go. Why can a high school have a gay lesbian club but not a marriage club?
I don't know that they can. I think a high school, if it's going to have a gay lesbian club, it has to be able to have a marriage club. And it seems that if they don't, especially if it's a public high school, that would be violating equal protection and all sorts of other. I mean, it just seems to me that if you're going to have student clubs, you can't discriminate based on viewpoint. That's one of the First Amendment principles for public educational institutions.
Okay.
And so if it's a public school, you're good.
Next question, and this comes up a lot in this community. Do you see where the clergy will be forced to perform marriages against their faith?
No, and that may be the only religious liberty protection that the other side agrees to. If anything, the current administration is willing to say that freedom of religion at least equals freedom of worship. The problem is that the free exercise of religion is much more than just freedom to worship. So it may be the case that they won't coerce a priest or a pastor or a rabbi or an imam to celebrate a same-sex wedding. But what we should be demanding is the freedom to live out our faith in the public square, in our business places, in our charities, in accordance with our beliefs, not be mandated by the government to violate our beliefs.
Another question. How can we best answer this question? Why do we allow drug-addicted felons to marry and bear children, but disallow law-abiding gay couples to marry and raise children?
Sure. I mean, what underlies that question is the idea that a same-sex union is a marriage. And I think that's just what we fundamentally disagree about. The disagreement here is not one of marriage equality. It's a disagreement about what is marriage. And if you think marriage is inherently the union of sexually complementary spouses, then it's a logical impossibility for a same-sex couple to be married. Whether or not it's prudent for a drug addict to get married or for a felon to get married is a separate question, but it's a possibility. No one denies that drug addicts and felons can actually form marriages. Whether or not it's good policy is another question. But here, I mean, I think to remember how the government works here is that it doesn't coerce people to get married or forcibly prevent people from getting married. It just incentivizes people to get married permanently and exclusively. That's what the government's trying to do.
Several judges have tried to disconnect marriage from childbearing by citing childless couples and older couples as a basis for granting same-sex marriage. Is there a succinct rebuttal to that argument?
Yes. Here's the one-sentence rebuttal. Not every marriage will have a child, but every child has a mother and a father. And marriage exists to unite that mother and father with the child.
Another question. Is it surprising to see so many couples taking advantage of recent court decisions in Utah? About 900 couples were married a few days after the ruling was made. Is there really that much demand, or is it somehow a skewed perception?
It's interesting. I don't have the statistics at my fingertips here, but if you look at the percentage of self-reporting LGBT Americans and then those who have gotten married in the states that currently have redefined marriage, Massachusetts has it for 10 years, it's a very small fraction of the community.
The UCLA study, I think, showed about 1.7% of the American population is gay or lesbian. And that's the last study I've seen. Is that correct?
I thought the number was a little higher, but it's smaller than most people think it is. And I thought it could have been closer to 3%, but I don't have the stat readily available.
Okay. And it may be 3%. It's just somewhere in there. Another question. How is, and I'm reading this cold, so bear with me, how is subliminal messaging used to desensitize people, especially youth, getting them and to accept same-sex marriage?
All right, so
in other words, what is Hollywood doing to us?
Yeah, so if I understand the question right, I think what lies behind it is the reality that the television show Glee has done just as much to corrupt a young generation about marriage than anything the Supreme Court has done. And that we have to be sensitive to what sort of popular entertainment we're consuming at home and how that's shaping our children.
Okay, another question. This comes up a lot on my show as well. Shouldn't we retire marriage to religion?
If marriage was only a sacramental or covenantal or an ordinance, something like that, then we could do it. Let's say marriage was like baptism. We don't have government in the baptism business. Baptism is something that the churches get to do on their own, according to their own theologies, largely because baptism doesn't bear on the political common good. But marriage, I'm Catholic, so I'll speak more distinctly from a Catholic tradition. Marriage is both a sacred and a natural institution. Baptism is just a sacred institution. There's no natural baptism in that sense. And so the government's not in the baptism business. But they need to be in the marriage business because while as a Catholic we believe Jesus elevates the natural institution of marriage to the sacramental level, we think it first exists in nature. It's built into us as embodied creatures, male and female, which is why we see that marriages take place not just among Christians, not just among Jews, but all across the globe, all throughout histories. The ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, the Chinese, more or less everyone has been engaged in this institution. Why? Because the sexual union of a man and a woman can be fertile. It can produce a child, and that child needs a mom and a dad. And that's why the state recognizes marriage in a way that it doesn't recognize baptism.
Another question. I support marriage, but shouldn't we protect gays' need for housing and employment with a non-discrimination law, which was an issue here this year?
Yeah. I think too often the non-discrimination laws are just used as a way of discriminating against those who hold traditional views about marriage. They're not actually used, I think to a certain extent, if you want to protect housing and employment for any person, encourage free markets. Free markets are the best way of protecting anyone's economic rights, because a free market is going to be the most efficient and it's going to create the best opportunities, because employers want the best employees regardless of their sexual attractions. A landlord wants to have the best tenants regardless of their sexual attractions. And so it wouldn't be in the long run for a business profitable to be discriminating against good employees for no reason whatsoever. But it's different if you're a religious day school and you don't want to have a teacher modeling something false about marriage to impressionable school children. But if you pass the non-discrimination statute, it then will say that that school might not be able to do that. Frequently, the non-discrimination statute also includes gender identity. That's the other thing to highlight. It's normally not just sexual orientation. The acronym is SOGI. SOGI stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. And so it would be, you would be guilty of discrimination if you were an employer and one of your male employees who is now identifying as female wanted to use the ladies' bathroom and you said no. I don't think that's good public policy.
Since I'm the moderator, I'm going to ask the last question. The issue I think the state of Utah is looking at and other states is a question of sovereignty. And do states have a right to determine their own domestic policy dealing with marriage and other issues like that? Because that's an argument I think the state is going to try and make. Questions I get, well, what would prevent a state then to discriminate against African Americans or Hispanics? How do you respond to that question? Because it comes up often.
Sure. One thing is to say that the 14th Amendment was specifically passed to prevent states from discriminating on the basis of race. So that's one thing to say.
But judges are using the 14th Amendment in the argument for same-sex marriage as well.
So, and then it's to point out the 14th Amendment was not passed to say anything about same-sex marriage. No one who was ratifying the 14th Amendment thought that it was going to declare all state marriage laws at the time unconstitutional. That's not what the 14th Amendment was about. The 14th Amendment, more or less, it's equal protection of the law. And to understand how you could have an equal protection of the law violation is to say, is the person similarly situated with respect to the law, the policy there? It seems clear, and the reason it seems clear is that there hasn't been a single great thinker throughout human history that thought marriage had anything to do with race. You read Plato and Aristotle, you read Augustine and Aquinas, Luther and Calvin, John Locke and Immanuel Kant. They never talk about race when they talk about marriage. That's why marriage laws have to be colorblind. And so an interracial couple is similarly situated with respect to marriage, given that marriage is the union of a man and a woman irrespective of race. But the same-sex couple is not similarly situated, given that marriage is the union of sexually complementary spouses.
Ryan, you've been terrific. The audience has been